Close brace. For JavaScript developers, by JavaScript developers. Alright, we're back with another episode of 5 Minute React. In this tutorial, we're going to write a basic test for our API and watch it fail because we haven't actually built the API endpoint yet. In the follow-up, we'll build that endpoint and get the test running. We've got Jest for testing and Supertest for creating HTTP requests. What we need is something to deal with the fact that HTTP requests are asynchronous. Supertest has built-in promises that can handle that, so let's talk about those for a second, even though we're not going to use them. Have you ever seen code that looks like this? Get data, then manipulate data? If so, you've used, or at least looked at, promises. That code is saying perform an asynchronous action, say hitting the DB for data, and then, once the data comes in, do something with it. It's a way to avoid using tons of callback functions, which can lead to the aptly named callback hell, where you end up nested 10 tabs deep because you're doing something like this. Get data, massage data, filter data, uppercase data, display data. That's just horrible. Promises help solve that, but a new feature of ES7, async await, is even better. That same code up above would look like this. That's a little more verbose, but it's much better. Just a sequence of events, each awaiting the resolution of the previous line. Still perhaps a little confusing if you're new to async await, but don't worry, we'll work through it. Trust me, this stuff is awesome and it's what most developers will be using for asynchronous requests in the next few years. The good news is, the version of Node we're using, 7.7.2, already supports it. Now we need a file that lays out our test. Some people like to store tests in a separate folder, but I prefer to keep them in the same folder as whatever they're testing. In this case, that's our API folder. So let's get rid of this. Then create a new file and save it as users.test.js. You'll note that we don't have a users.js yet in our API folder. We'll get there, promise. Here's how JavaScript testing works on a basic level. You make assertions and then test against them. Assertions are you telling the testing environment what should happen or what to expect when the test is run. This means it's important to write assertions in plain English that describe exactly what's supposed to happen. For example, this is a bad assertion. Test the user API does not tell us what behavior is expected. This is better. Describe the user API. It returns a list of all users. That explicitly explains what exactly is supposed to happen. This makes tests more readable, both in the code and in the display that occurs when we run them. Note that the describe block is just for making our test results a little prettier. We could have multiple it blocks underneath that one describe, allowing us to group multiple tests against the user's API. Alright, let's use that code to create our test. Here's the code with comments, but I'll also explain what's going on. Okay, let's talk about this test before we run it. Right here, we're bringing in Supertest and assigning it to the variable request, as in server request, because that's what Supertest does. It makes testable requests to a server. As we know from previous tutorials, when you make a request to a server, you get a response in return. Next, we use a describe function to add a top-level header to our test, under which we define a specific test. See this async before the function we're passing the test? That tells us not to continue until any await requests in the function are fulfilled sequentially. We work with that on the next line when we say that our res variable must await the server's response. Here's the await. That also includes these chained methods. Without this async await block, we'd send a request out to the server, but the test would just keep a-running. Res would be undefined or null because the script is executing faster than the server can respond, and all our tests would fail. Once we have a server response, the async await loop will complete and the test will continue on. Now res is full of our entire server response, which is a whole bunch of stuff. But what we really want is the body, which is the JSON that the API is sending back. From here, we can test that the body is an array, that it has something in it, and that the first, and only for now, entry's username is administrator. That'd be great, except, as we've pointed out, we don't have an API endpoint yet. Save this file, open package.json, and in the scripts section, add a comma, and the following. Test Jest. Save that. Now let's run this test and watch it fail. Switch to your terminal or command prompt. Make sure MongoDB is running. Yup. Make sure your Express server is running. Nope. Yarn start. There we go. Now, in a separate terminal window or command prompt, type yarn test. Error. Fail. The user API returns a list of all users. Expected 200 OK, got 404 not found. Then we have a stack trace. Then we have a little bit more information about the test. That is a big ugly error, but what it comes down to is the test is failing because the server is responding with a 404, and we were expecting a 200. Can't test something that doesn't exist. In the next tutorial, we'll fix that. Catch you there.